The emergency sirens screamed through the research vessel, but Sarah Chen barely heard them anymore. She had been listening to that terrible sound for the past 40 seconds, ever since the asteroid fragment tore through the hull like paper. Now she was running, her boots magnetic locked to the floor as the ship spun wildly through space. The corridor tilted. Sarah's stomach lurched. Through the viewport, she saw the planet rushing up to meet them. Carvish Prime, the red and purple world that hung on every danger map in the sector. The planet they were only supposed to scan from orbit. The planet where survey teams went missing and nothing came back except warnings. Brace for impact, the computer said in its calm voice, like it was announcing lunch instead of death. Sarah threw herself into an escape pod. Her fingers fumbled with the straps. The pod sealed with a hiss. Then the world became fire and noise and spinning chaos. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried not to scream. When everything finally stopped moving, Sarah just breathed. In and out. In and out. She was alive. That seemed impossible, but her shaking hands and racing heart said it was true. The pod door blew open with a bang. Smoke poured out. Sarah coughed and stumbled onto alien soil for the first time. The crash site spread before her like a graveyard. The Meridian's Hope had carved a burning scar across the landscape. Pieces of the ship lay scattered everywhere, some still glowing red with heat. Sarah counted 3 other escape pods in the wreckage. All of them were crushed flat. She was alone. Sarah checked her emergency pack. Water rations for 5 days. Protein bars for a week if she stretched them. A medical kit. A flare gun with 3 charges. A scanner, a knife. Not much to survive on a hostile world where everything wanted to kill you. The scanner beeped. Sarah looked at the readings and her blood went cold. Carvish signatures everywhere. Dozens of them. The planet's apex predators drawn by the noise and heat of the crash. She had maybe an hour before they arrived. Sarah ran. The landscape of Carvish Prime looked like something from a nightmare. Purple grass grew in thick patches, sharp as needles. The trees had black bark and blood-red leaves. Rocky formations jutted up like broken teeth. Everything smelled wrong, like copper and ozone and something else she could not name. She ran until her lungs burned. Then she ran more. Behind her she heard sounds, clicking, chittering, the scrape of claws on stone. The Carvish were coming. Sarah found a canyon and scrambled down into it. The walls rose high on both sides, offering shelter from sight. She pressed herself against the rock and tried to quiet her gasping breaths. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure everything on the planet could hear it. The sounds passed overhead. Heavy footfalls. Deep breathing. Sarah counted at least 6 different animals. They were hunting in a pack. Smart, coordinated, deadly. When the sounds finally faded, Sarah allowed herself to relax slightly. She was safe. For now. That was when she heard the crying. At first she thought it was the wind, but no, there it was again. A mewling sound, high-pitched and desperate. It came from deeper in the canyon, from a dark opening in the rock face. Sarah knew she should ignore it. She should find shelter and wait for rescue. She should focus on staying alive. But she was a xenobiologist. Understanding alien life was not just her job. It was who she was. She approached the opening carefully. The crying got louder. Sarah turned on her scanner's light and stepped inside. The den was small and curved. At the back, huddled together, were 3 small shapes. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Carvish cubs. They were tiny, barely the size of house cats. Their 6 limbs were folded underneath them. The crystalline spines along their backs glowed faintly in the darkness, not yet developed enough to be dangerous. Their eyes were barely open, cloudy and unfocused. They cried out again, a sound of pure need. Sarah swept her light around the den and found the mother. The Carvish matriarch lay near the entrance, half buried under rock. A piece of the ship's hull had crushed her during the crash. She must have been hunting nearby when the debris fell from the sky. The cubs were too young to have been with her. She had left them here, safe in the den, and now she would never return. Sarah backed away. This was not her problem. The cubs would die, yes, but that was nature. That was survival. She had to think about herself. She made it 5 steps before she stopped. The crying continued behind her, desperate, hopeless. The cubs were calling for a mother who would never come. Sarah checked her scanner. The readings made her curse. The cubs were severely dehydrated. In this dry climate, they had maybe hours left. Their mother must have been their only water source. This is stupid, Sarah said out loud. This is the stupidest thing you have ever done, Sarah Chen. but she was already walking back into the den. The cubs recoiled when she approached. They hissed, baring tiny fangs. Their crystalline spines tried to bristle, but they were too weak. Sarah sat down slowly, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Easy," she whispered. "I know I smell wrong. I know I look scary, but you need help." She pulled out one of her water rations and opened it. The cubs watched with desperate eyes. Sarah poured water into her cupped hands and held it out. The cubs did not move. Sarah waited. Her arms began to ache. Water dripped between her fingers. The cubs just stared, wanting the water but afraid of the strange alien holding it. "Please," Sarah said softly. "Just drink. I am not going to hurt you." An hour passed. Then another. Sarah's arms trembled from holding the same position. She poured more water to replace what spilled. The cubs whimpered but would not come closer. The smallest cub moved first. It was the weakest, the most desperate. It crawled forward on shaking legs. Its nose twitched, sniffing Sarah's scent. Then, finally, it lowered its head to her hands and drank. The water disappeared in seconds. The cub looked up at Sarah with clearer eyes, then made a small chirping sound. The other two cubs perked up. If their sibling survived drinking from the alien, maybe it was safe. They came forward together. Soon all three were drinking from Sarah's hands, their rough tongues tickling her palms. She poured more water. They drank until their bellies were round and full. When they finished, the cubs did not run away. Instead, they curled up against Sarah's legs and fell asleep. Sarah looked down at the three tiny predators using her as a pillow. She thought about the adult Karvesh that would come looking for these cubs. She thought about her limited supplies. She thought about how far she was from rescue. "I am definitely going to die here," she said quietly. But the cubs were warm against her legs. Their breathing was steady and peaceful now. They trusted her. This strange alien who smelled wrong and looked wrong, but who had given them water when they needed it most. Sarah activated her distress beacon. The signal went out into space, calling for help that might never come. Then she settled back against the den wall to wait. The cubs slept on. Outside, the red sun of Karvesh Prime began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Sarah closed her eyes and tried not to think about what would happen when the cubs woke up hungry. Or worse, when their family came looking for them. Sarah woke to the feeling of something rough scraping across her face. She opened her eyes to find the smallest cub licking her cheek. Its tongue felt like sandpaper. Behind it, the other two cubs were awake and staring at her with bright, curious eyes. "Good morning to you too," Sarah muttered. Her whole body ached from sleeping against the rock wall. Her neck felt like someone had tied it in knots. The cubs chirped at her. The sound was demanding. Sarah did not need a translator to understand what they wanted. "Hungry, right? Of course you are." She checked her supplies. 2 protein bars left. That was for her. The cubs needed meat, real meat. Sarah looked at the 3 small predators and sighed. If she wanted to keep them alive, she would have to hunt. The planet's ecosystem came alive as the sun rose. Strange bird-like creatures with 4 wings flew overhead. Something that looked like a cross between a rabbit and a lizard darted through the purple grass. Sarah marked everything on her scanner, learning what was food and what was danger. She found tracks near a water source. Small prints, probably made by prey animals. Sarah set a simple trap using wire from her emergency kit. Then she waited. The cubs waited with her. They seemed fascinated by everything Sarah did. When she tied the knot, they watched closely. When she covered the trap with grass, they leaned forward to see. They were learning. That should have been impossible for animals so young. But Karvesh were not normal predators. The trap worked. By midday, Sarah had caught 2 small creatures. They looked like purple rodents with 6 legs. The cubs went wild when they smelled the blood. Sarah skinned the animals with her knife, trying not to think too hard about what she was doing. The cubs tore into the meat with savage efficiency. Their tiny fangs might have looked cute, but they ripped through flesh like razors. Sarah reminded herself that these adorable creatures would grow up to be the most dangerous predators on the planet. After they ate, the cubs returned to Sarah and curled up against her. One of them, the smallest, climbed into her lap and fell asleep. Sarah found herself stroking its back, careful to avoid the crystalline spines. The cub purred, a sound like rocks grinding together softly. "You need names," Sarah said. "I cannot keep calling you the small one and the other 2. She studied each cub carefully. The smallest had a white patch on its chest that seemed to glow faintly. Nova, Sarah decided. The middle cub had dark red markings like dying embers. Cinder. The largest had unusually reflective spines that caught every sound. Echo. The cubs responded to their names immediately. When Sarah said Nova, the smallest perked up. Cinder made the middle one chirp. Echo brought the largest to attention. It should have taken weeks of training, but somehow the cubs understood. Sarah spent the next few days establishing a routine. Hunt in the morning, feed the cubs, search for water sources, try to keep everyone alive. The cubs grew stronger each day. Their spines developed more. Their eyes became sharp and focused. They started following Sarah everywhere she went. On the fourth day, Sarah tried an experiment. She poured water into her metal cup and offered it to Nova. The cub sniffed the cup, then backed away and whined. Sarah tried with Cinder. Same reaction. Echo would not even approach the cup. But when Sarah cupped the water in her hands, all three cubs rushed forward to drink. Why? Sarah wondered aloud. Why only from my hands? She reviewed her xenobiology training. Some species imprinted on parental figures. Others responded to specific chemical signals. But this was different. The cubs did not just see her as a parent. They had bonded to something specific about the way she offered care. Sarah checked her scanner and found something interesting in the data. Karvesh cubs generated weak bioelectric fields through their crystalline spines. When Sarah held water in her hands, the cubs could sense her emotional state through those fields. They could feel that she genuinely wanted to help them. It was not just about water. It was about trust. That night, Sarah heard sounds outside the den. Heavy footfalls. Deep breathing. Adult Karvesh moving through the canyon. She held perfectly still, barely breathing. The cubs pressed against her, silent and trembling. The sounds came closer. Sarah could hear sniffing. The adults were tracking scents. They would smell their cubs. They would smell the strange alien with them. Sarah gripped her knife, knowing it would be useless against a full-grown Karvesh. But the footsteps stopped at the den entrance. There was more sniffing. Then strangely the sounds retreated. The adult Karvesh left without entering. Sarah did not understand it then, but the adults were confused. They smelled their young, yes, but mixed with an alien scent. The cubs should have been crying for help, but instead they smelled content. Safe. The adult Karvesh could not make sense of it, so they backed away to observe. The next morning, Sarah's scanner picked up a signal. A ship had received her distress beacon. A Concordance patrol vessel was in the system. Sarah nearly cried with relief. She activated her emergency transmitter. This is Dr. Sarah Chen of the Meridian's Hope. I am the sole survivor. I am located in the canyon system. Coordinates uploading now. Requesting immediate extraction. The response came quickly. Dr. Chen, this is Patrol Ship Vigilance. We have your location. However, our scans show heavy Karvesh activity in your area. Protocol forbids landing in active predator territory. You need to reach the original crash site. We can extract you from there in 72 hours. Sarah looked at the crash site coordinates. It was 3 days' journey through open terrain, through Karvesh hunting grounds. Alone, she might have made it by moving at night and hiding during the day. But she was not alone anymore. The cubs looked up at her with trusting eyes. Nova chirped and nudged her hand, wanting water. Cinder and Echo pressed against her legs. They had no idea that Sarah was thinking about leaving them. Vigilance, I have a complication, Sarah said into the transmitter. I have 3 Karvesh cubs with me. They are orphaned. They will not survive without care. There was a long pause. Then, Dr. Chen, you are not authorized to interfere with native species. Leave the cubs and proceed to extraction point. That is an order. Sarah looked down at Nova, who was now drinking from her cupped hands. The cub's eyes were bright and healthy. 3 days ago, this small creature had been hours from death. Now it was thriving. Negative vigilance, Sarah said. I am bringing the cubs with me. Another pause. Dr. Chen, be reasonable. You cannot possibly. Sarah turned off the transmitter. She packed her remaining supplies. The protein bars were gone. Her water was running low. But she had her knife, her scanner, and her determination. That would have to be enough. All right, kids, she said to the cubs. We are going on a trip. A very dangerous trip. You need to stay close to me and do exactly what I say. Can you do that? The cubs chirped in unison. Sarah chose to interpret that as agreement. She stepped out of the den for the last time. The canyon stretched before her, leading back toward the crash site. Somewhere out there, adult Karvesh were waiting. But somewhere beyond them was safety, rescue, home. Sarah started walking. Behind her, 3 small predators followed, their trust absolute and their bond unbreakable. They did not know that their alien guardian was leading them through the most dangerous territory on the planet. They only knew that she had given them water from her hands when they needed it most, and that somehow was enough. The first day of travel taught Sarah that moving with 3 cubs was nothing like moving alone. Every 100 meters, one of them would stop to investigate something. A strange plant, an interesting rock, a bug that made clicking sounds. Sarah had to keep stopping and waiting for them to catch up. "We do not have time for this," she told them after the 10th stop. "There are things out here that want to eat both you and me." The cubs just tilted their heads at her. Nova made a chirping sound that seemed almost like laughter. By afternoon, Sarah had developed a system. She would make a specific clicking sound with her tongue, and the cubs learned that meant follow closely. A short whistle meant stop. A longer whistle meant hide. The cubs picked up these signals frighteningly fast. What should have taken weeks of training happened in hours. They were not just smart. They were reading her intent through their bioelectric senses. Every time Sarah gave a command, they felt whether she was scared, urgent, or calm. They responded to her emotions as much as her sounds. That ability saved their lives when the first hunting pack appeared. Sarah spotted them through her scanner before they came into view. 5 adult Karvesh, moving in a coordinated pattern. They were tracking something, and Sarah had a terrible feeling she knew what. She gave the long whistle. All 3 cubs immediately scrambled into a nearby bush and went perfectly still. Sarah barely had time to hide behind a rock before the hunting pack passed by. The adults were massive. Each one stood as tall as Sarah's shoulder and was twice as long. Their crystalline spines glowed with active bioelectric fields, constantly sweeping the area for prey. Their claws left deep gouges in the stone as they walked. These were perfect killing machines refined by millions of years of evolution. One of the adults stopped near Sarah's hiding spot. Its head swung back and forth, spines pulsing. It had detected something. Sarah held her breath. Her heart hammered so loud she was sure the creature could hear it. The Karvesh took a step toward her hiding spot. Then another. Sarah gripped her knife, knowing how useless it would be. The creature's jaws could crush her skull with a single bite. Then Nova made a soft chirping sound from the bush. The adult Karvesh's head snapped toward the sound. It approached the bush slowly. Sarah wanted to scream, to draw its attention away from the cubs, but any sound would give away her position too. The adult reached the bush and stopped. It lowered its head and sniffed. The cubs were right there, completely exposed. Sarah prepared to run, to do something, anything to save them. But the adult Karvesh did not attack. Instead, it made a low, rumbling sound, almost questioning. The cubs chirped back. There was a moment of stillness. Then the adult turned and walked away, calling to the rest of the pack. They moved on, leaving the cubs untouched. Sarah waited until the pack was completely gone before she came out of hiding. The cubs emerged from the bush looking confused but unharmed. "What just happened?" Sarah whispered. She thought about it as they continued walking. The adult should have killed the cubs. In nature, predators often killed young that were not their own. But something had stopped it. Maybe the cubs smelled wrong, contaminated with Sarah's alien scent. Maybe the adult sensed that these cubs were bonded to something else. Or maybe, Sarah thought, the adult was just confused about why cubs would trust an alien so completely. They traveled through the afternoon, taking a winding path that avoided open areas. Sarah's scanner showed Karvesh signatures all around them, but none came close. It was like the predators were watching from a distance, observing but not interfering. As the sun set, Sarah found a defensible position between 2 large rocks. She was exhausted. The cubs were tired too, their small legs struggling to keep up with her longer strides. But they had covered good distance. At this rate, they might reach the crash site in 3 days as planned. Sarah checked her supplies. Half a water ration left, no food. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had given everything to the cubs. She would need to hunt tomorrow, but tonight she just wanted to rest. The cubs curled up against her as darkness fell. Nova climbed into her lap as usual. Cinder and Echo pressed against her sides. Their body heat kept her warm as the temperature dropped. Sarah found herself stroking their backs, feeling the developing spines under her fingers. "You 3 are going to be huge someday," she said softly. "Probably going to hunt things 10 times your size. Maybe even hunt things like me." Nova looked up at her and made a gentle sound. Sarah smiled despite her exhaustion. Yeah, I know. You would never hunt me. Right now you love me. But what happens when you grow up? When your instincts kick in? When you realize I am not actually your mother? The questions hung in the air unanswered. Sarah did not know what would happen when they reached the ship. Would the Concordance even let her bring the cubs aboard? Would they try to separate them? The cubs had bonded to her completely. Breaking that bond might kill them. She fell asleep worrying about problems she could not solve yet. The second day brought new challenges. They had to cross open ground, a stretch of purple grassland with no cover. Sarah's scanner showed Karvesh signatures in every direction. They were surrounded. We move fast and quiet, Sarah told the cubs. No stopping. No investigating. Just follow me. She started across the grassland at a quick pace. The cubs followed, their small forms almost invisible in the tall grass. Sarah kept her eyes moving, scanning for threats. Her hand stayed on her knife. Halfway across, she saw them, adult Karvesh, sitting in a circle around the grassland's edge. At least a dozen of them. They were not hunting. They were not moving. They were just watching. Sarah's blood ran cold. This was an ambush. They had been herded into this open space. Now the predators would close in and finish them. But the attack never came. The adults just watched as Sarah and the cubs crossed the grassland. Their crystalline spines glowed and pulsed, but they did not move. It was the strangest thing Sarah had ever seen. Predators did not just let prey walk by. Unless, Sarah realized, they did not see her as prey anymore. The cubs had changed something. By bonding with Sarah, by following her so completely, they had sent a message to the other Karvesh. This alien was Pack. This alien was protecting cubs. That meant something in Karvesh society. They reached the other side of the grassland safely. Sarah looked back at the watching adults. One of them, larger than the others, met her eyes. For a moment, woman and predator stared at each other across the distance. Then the large Karvesh lowered its head slightly. Just a small movement, but Sarah felt its meaning. Respect, or maybe acknowledgement. Sarah nodded back. Then she continued walking, the cubs at her heels. The third day was the hardest. They had to cross a river and the cubs could not swim. Sarah had to carry them one at a time, wading through water that came up to her chest. The current was strong. Halfway across with Nova, Sarah's foot slipped on a rock. She went under. The water closed over her head. Nova slipped from her grasp. Sarah's lungs burned as she fought to surface. She could not see, could not breathe. The current pulled her downstream. Then her survival instincts kicked in. Sarah found her footing and pushed up. She broke the surface, gasping. Nova was being swept away, crying out in terror. Sarah did not think. She dove after the cub. The current battered her against rocks. Her shoulder hit something hard and pain exploded through her arm. But she kept swimming. She caught Nova just before the cub went over a small waterfall. Sarah dragged them both to shore and collapsed on the bank. Nova coughed up water and whimpered. Sarah pulled the cub close, ignoring her own pain. I have got you, she gasped. You are safe. I have got you. From the other side of the river, Cinder and Echo cried out. Sarah looked up and saw the large Karvesh from the grassland standing behind them. The creature was watching, judging. Sarah had just risked her life for a cub. Not her species. Not her young. An alien creature that would grow up to be a deadly predator. She had done it without hesitation. The large Karvesh made a sound, deep and rumbling. Then it did something that shocked Sarah. It carefully picked up Cinder in its jaws, waded into the water, and carried the cub across. Then it went back for Echo. When all three cubs were together again, the large Karvesh looked at Sarah one more time. Then it turned and disappeared into the forest. Sarah sat there, dripping wet and shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. The apex predator of this planet had just helped her. Why? But she knew why. She had proved something. Sacrifice, protection, care. These were things the Karvesh understood. These were things they valued. Sarah checked her scanner. The crash site was less than a day away now. She could see the smoke from the wreckage on the horizon. Rescue was close. But as she looked down at the three cubs pressed against her, Sarah wondered if reaching the ship would be the end of this journey or just the beginning of something more complicated. Sarah saw the crash site at dawn on the fourth day. The wreckage still smoldered, a scar of twisted metal across the purple landscape. The Vigilance was scheduled to land in 6 hours. 6 hours until rescue. 6 hours until she had to make an impossible choice. The cubs sensed her tension. They pressed closer to her legs as they walked, making worried sounds. Nova kept looking up at her face, trying to understand what was wrong. "It is okay," Sarah lied. "Everything is going to be okay." But she did not know if that was true. They reached the crash site's perimeter by mid-morning. Sarah found a spot with good visibility and sat down to wait. The cubs immediately began exploring the wreckage, fascinated by the strange metal objects. Sarah watched them play, memorizing every moment. She might not have much time left with them. Her transmitter crackled to life. "Dr. Chen, this is Vigilance. We are beginning our approach. Prepare for extraction in 5 hours." "Understood, Vigilance," Sarah replied. Her voice sounded hollow. "Dr. Chen, I need to confirm. Are you alone?" Sarah looked at the 3 cubs. Nova had found a piece of reflective metal and was batting at her own reflection. Cinder and Echo were wrestling, their small growls echoing across the clearing. "Negative, Vigilance. I still have the cubs." There was a long silence. Then a different voice came through the transmitter. "Dr. Chen, this is Captain Vross. I understand you have formed an attachment to native fauna, but our protocols are clear. We cannot remove animals from their natural habitat. You need to leave them behind." "They will die if I leave them," Sarah said flatly. "They are too young to survive alone." "That is the natural order, Doctor. We do not interfere with—" "They imprinted on me," Sarah interrupted. "They drink water only from my hands. They follow my commands. They trust me completely. If I abandon them now after everything we have been through, what does that say about humanity?" "It says we follow regulations designed to protect alien ecosystems," Captain Vross replied. "I am sorry, Dr. Chen, but my decision is final. You will board alone or not at all." Sarah closed her eyes. She had known this was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. "Understood, Captain. Chen out." She turned off the transmitter and sat in silence. The cubs, sensing her distress, abandoned their playing and came to her. They piled into her lap, all 3 trying to fit at once. Nova licked her face. Cinder made comforting sounds. Echo pressed his head against her chest. Sarah wrapped her arms around them and tried not to cry. That was when she heard the sound. A deep rumbling call that echoed across the landscape. Sarah looked up to see Karvesh emerging from the forest. Not just a few, dozens. They moved in formation, surrounding the crash site in a massive circle, and at their head was the large matriarch who had helped them cross the river. Sarah stood slowly, her heart racing. The cubs chirped and ran toward the approaching Karvesh. Sarah wanted to call them back, but her voice would not work. She could only watch as the tiny cubs approached the massive predator. The matriarch lowered her head and sniffed each cub carefully. Then she looked at Sarah, really looked at her. The crystalline spines along the matriarch's back glowed brightly, pulsing with bioelectric energy. Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation, like the creature was reading her thoughts. The matriarch took a step forward, then another. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she stood right in front of Sarah. The creature was enormous up close. Her jaws could snap Sarah in half. Her claws could disembowel with a single swipe. Sarah did not run. She met the matriarch's eyes and waited. The matriarch made a soft rumbling sound. Then incredibly she lowered her head and pushed it gently against Sarah's chest. Not aggressive. Not threatening. It almost seemed like affection. Sarah raised a trembling hand and placed it on the matriarch's head. The crystalline spines felt warm under her palm. She could feel the bioelectric pulses, and suddenly she understood. The matriarch was not just an animal. There was intelligence there, awareness, understanding. "You are their grandmother," Sarah whispered. "You came back for them." The matriarch pulled back and made another sound. The cubs ran to her, chirping excitedly. But then Nova did something unexpected. She ran back to Sarah and sat at her feet, looking up with trusting eyes. Cinder and Echo followed, flanking Sarah on either side. They were choosing. The cubs were choosing Sarah over their own species. The matriarch watched this. Her spines pulsed rapidly. Sarah could not read the emotions, but she felt the weight of the moment. This was significant. This meant something in Karvesh culture. Sarah knelt down and pulled out her last water ration. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. This was insane. This was the stupidest thing she had ever done. But she poured water into her cupped hands and held them out to the matriarch. The massive predator stared at the offering. The other Karvesh around the perimeter fell silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Everything waited. The matriarch lowered her head. Her rough tongue touched Sarah's palms. She drank, Sarah barely breathed. The matriarch drank all the water from her hands, then looked up. For a moment their eyes met. Sarah saw something in that gaze. Recognition, respect, understanding that crossed the barrier between species. The matriarch made a sound, not threatening, not aggressive. It was a call, and every Karvesh around the perimeter responded. They stood up straight, spines glowing in unison. It looked like a salute. Sarah realized she was crying. Tears ran down her face as she understood what had just happened. The matriarch had accepted her. The pack had accepted her. She was not prey. She was not an intruder. She was something new. Something that had no name yet in either human or Karvesh language. The sound of engines broke the moment. Sarah looked up to see the vigilance descending from the sky. The ship was huge, its thrusters kicking up clouds of purple dust. The Karvesh around the perimeter tensed but did not flee. The ship landed 100 meters away. A hatch opened and a ramp extended. Captain Vross appeared at the opening, flanked by 2 security officers. He took one look at the scene before him and froze. Sarah stood with 3 cubs at her feet. The matriarch stood beside her. Dozens of apex predators surrounded them in formation, and none of them were attacking. "Captain Vross," Sarah called out, "I think we need to reconsider your extraction protocol." The captain slowly descended the ramp. His security officers kept their weapons ready but pointed at the ground. They approached carefully, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dr. Chen," the captain said slowly, "what exactly am I looking at here?" "First contact," Sarah replied. "Real first contact. Not with their leaders or their cities because they do not have those things, but with their families, their packs. I think the Karvesh might be a lot more than we realized." She gestured to the matriarch. "This is the cub's grandmother. She has been watching us for days, testing me, and I think we just passed some kind of evaluation. Dr. Chen, the Karvesh are classified as non-sentient." "Then the classification is wrong," Sarah interrupted. "Look at them, Captain. Really look. They are organized. They communicate. They make decisions based on complex social bonds. They just showed me more compassion than your protocol did." The captain was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the matriarch, who stared back calmly. Then he looked at the cubs, who had not moved from Sarah's side. "Doctor," he said carefully, "if I bring those cubs aboard my ship, I am violating about 15 different regulations. No, I could lose my command. No, the Concordance will have to completely reevaluate their xenobiology protocols. I am counting on it, Captain." Frost smiled slightly. "You are asking me to risk everything on the theory that these predators are actually intelligent." Sarah knelt down and scooped Nova into her arms. The cub chirped happily and licked her chin. "I am not asking you to risk anything, Captain. I am showing you proof. These cubs chose me over their own grandmother. They trust me completely, and their grandmother just drank from my hands. If that is not intelligence, if that is not understanding and choice and respect, then I do not know what is." The matriarch made a low sound. Then she did something that shocked everyone. She carefully picked up Cinder by the scruff, carried her to Sarah, and placed the cub at Sarah's feet. She went back for Echo and did the same. All 3 cubs now sat at Sarah's feet, looking up at her expectantly. The matriarch backed away slowly. She made a sound to the other Karvesh. They responded with their own calls. Then, as one, the entire pack turned and began moving back toward the forest. But the matriarch stopped at the edge of the clearing. She looked back at Sarah one last time. Her spines pulsed in a pattern that Sarah somehow understood. Take care of them. Teach them. And maybe someday teach us too. Then she was gone, disappearing into the purple forest with her pack. Sarah stood holding Nova with Cinder and Echo at her feet. Captain Vross stared at the empty forest, then back at Sarah, then at the cubs. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose if I am going to end my career, I might as well make it spectacular. Get those cubs aboard before I change my mind." Sarah felt relief flood through her. "Thank you, Captain." "Do not thank me yet," he said, heading back to the ship. "You are going to have to explain all of this to command. And Doctor, you are writing that report." Sarah followed him up the ramp, the cubs trotting at her heels. As the ship lifted off, she looked out the viewport at the receding landscape of Karvesh Prime. Somewhere down there, the matriarch was watching them leave. 6 months had passed since Sarah Chen had stood before the Concordance Council and changed everything. She still remembered the stunned silence when she had shown them the recordings. 3 Karvesh cubs drinking from her hands, a matriarch accepting water as a gesture of peace, an entire pack treating a lone human as one of their own. The council had argued for 3 days. Some wanted to classify it as an anomaly, others demanded the cubs be returned immediately. But the evidence was undeniable. The Karvesh were not simple predators. They were complex, intelligent, and capable of forming bonds across species lines. In the end, the council had done something unprecedented. They had created a new classification, potentially emergent sentience, and they had created a new position, cross-species liaison. Sarah was the first and only person to hold that title. Now she stood on the observation deck of the research station orbiting Karvesh Prime, watching the planet slowly turn below. Behind her, 3 juvenile Karvesh wrestled on the floor. They were much bigger now, nearly the size of large dogs. Their crystalline spines had fully developed, glowing with active bioelectric fields. In a few months, they would be adults, but they still preferred drinking water from Sarah's hands. "Dr. Chen, we are ready for the morning session," her assistant said from the doorway. Dr. Yuki Tanaka was a linguist who had spent the past 6 months trying to decode Karvesh communication. She was brilliant and patient, which was good because the work was frustratingly slow. "Thanks, Yuki, I will be right there." Sarah knelt down. "Come on, you 3. Time to show off for the scientists." Nova, now sporting a sleek dark coat with that distinctive white chest patch, bounced over immediately. Cinder and Echo followed more slowly, their teenage rebellious phase showing. All 3 had grown into their names. Nova was the fastest and brightest. Cinder had a fiery temperament. Echo was quiet but observant, absorbing everything around him. They walked through the station's corridors. Other researchers stopped to stare. Seeing Karvesh outside their natural habitat was strange enough. Seeing them calmly follow a human was something else entirely. The testing room was large and equipped with every sensor the Concordance could provide. Today's session focused on problem solving. Dr. Tanaka had set up a series of puzzles that required cooperation to solve. "All right," Sarah said. "Same as yesterday. Work together. Figure it out," she released the cubs. They immediately began investigating the puzzle. It was a box with food inside, but the lid required 3 different locks to be opened simultaneously. The cubs had never seen this exact puzzle before. Nova tried biting the box. When that did not work, she looked at Cinder and made a series of chirping sounds. Cinder responded with different sounds. Then both looked at Echo. Echo examined each lock carefully, his spines pulsing as he sensed the mechanism inside. Then, without any signal Sarah could detect, all 3 moved to different locks. They manipulated them with their claws. The locks opened together. The lid popped up. "Incredible," Dr. Tanaka breathed. The coordination, the communication, they understood the problem and divided the solution without any trial and error. "They are learning faster every day," Sarah said. "Whatever intelligence they have, it is developing rapidly. I think our presence is accelerating it. Or maybe," Yuki suggested, "this intelligence was always there. We just never looked closely enough." Sarah thought about that as she watched the cubs share the food reward. How many other species had the Concordance dismissed as non-sentient? How many potential relationships had been missed because humans only looked for intelligence that resembled their own? The intercom beeped. "Dr. Chen, you have a visitor at Docking Bay 3, Sarah frowned. She was not expecting anyone. "Who is it?" "She says she is family." Sarah's heart skipped. She ran to the docking bay, the cubs racing to keep up with her. When the airlock opened, she saw Captain Vross standing there with a transport container. A very large transport container. "Captain, what are you doing here?" Vross smiled. "Special delivery, Doctor. From Karvesh Prime." The container opened. The matriarch stepped out. Sarah stopped breathing. The massive Karvesh looked around the docking bay, her spine sweeping the area with bioelectric pulses. The cubs froze, staring at their grandmother. For a moment, no one moved. Then Nova chirped and ran forward. The matriarch made a deep rumbling sound and lowered her head. Nova pressed against her, making happy sounds. Cinder and Echo followed, all 3 cubs reuniting with their grandmother. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. She had hoped for this but had not dared to believe it would actually happen. "How?" she asked. She walked right up to our research team on the surface, Frost explained. Just walked up to the base perimeter and sat down. Would not leave. Our xenobiologist realized she was trying to make contact, so we offered transport. She accepted. The matriarch looked up from the cubs and made eye contact with Sarah. There was recognition. There. Memory. The massive predator approached slowly. Sarah knelt down and pulled out a water bottle. Her hands were shaking as she poured water into her palms. The matriarch lowered her head and drank. I have missed you too, Sarah whispered. Captain Vross cleared his throat. There is more, Doctor. After the matriarch approached, others followed. We have had contact with 17 different Karvesh over the past month. They are bringing us things, showing us their territories. One pack even saved a research team from a cave collapse. They want to talk, Sarah said. They have always wanted to talk. We just never spoke the right language. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. The matriarch began teaching Sarah and her team about Karvesh society. Not through words, because they did not use words, but through action, demonstration, and the bioelectric signals that Sarah was slowly learning to interpret with special sensors. She learned that Karvesh packs were built on bonds of trust, earned through sacrifice and protection. The strongest pack members were not the biggest or most aggressive. They were the ones who had proven they would risk themselves for others. She learned that Karvesh cubs were placed in challenging situations deliberately to teach them problem-solving. But they were always watched, always protected. The matriarch had been watching her cubs from the moment Sarah found them. She learned that the water ritual, as Sarah had started calling it, held deep significance. Offering sustenance from your own body, from your own hands, was the ultimate sign of trust. It said, I will give to you even if it costs me. I will share even when resources are scarce. That was why the cubs would not drink from containers. They needed to feel Sarah's intent through the bioelectric connection when skin touched water. They needed to know the care was genuine. Sarah documented everything. Her reports went out across the concordance, changing minds and challenging assumptions. Other xenobiologists began reevaluating their own classifications. How many species had been dismissed too quickly? 3 months after the matriarch arrived, Sarah received an invitation. The Karvesh wanted her to return to their planet. Not as an observer, but as part of a delegation. First official contact. Sarah stood on Karvesh Prime once again, but this time she was not alone. The cubs, now nearly full-grown, stood beside her. Captain Vross and a team of diplomats waited behind her. And ahead, at the edge of a massive forest clearing, hundreds of Karvesh had gathered. The matriarch led Sarah forward. They walked to the center of the clearing together. The gathered Karvesh watched in silence. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, the bioelectric fields pulsing all around her. A container of water sat in the clearing's center. Sarah understood what was being asked. She approached it and knelt down. Then she cupped her hands and filled them with water. One by one, Karvesh came forward. Pack leaders, matriarchs, lone hunters. Each one approached Sarah. Each one lowered their head and drank from her hands. It took hours. Sarah's arms ached. Her knees hurt from kneeling. But she did not stop. This was important. This was history. When the last Karvesh had drunk, Sarah stood on shaking legs. Nova immediately pressed against her side, supporting her. Cinder and Echo flanked her protectively. The matriarch stood at her back. The gathered Karvesh made sounds together. A chorus of rumbles, chirps, and calls. The translation software on Sarah's collar struggled to interpret, but the basic meaning came through. Pack, family, alliance. Captain Vross approached carefully. Dr. Chen, I think you just became the first human to be formally adopted by an alien species. Sarah looked around at the hundreds of Karvesh watching her. She thought about how close she had come to dying on this planet. How she had found 3 helpless cubs and made a choice that defied logic. How that one act of compassion had opened a door no diplomat could have opened. Not adopted, Captain, Sarah said quietly. I think it is more than that. I think they are saying we can be pack. Humans and Karvesh. Different species, yes. Different worlds, yes. But bound by the same values. Protection. Sacrifice, care. The Concordance Council is not going to know what to do with this, Frost said, but he was smiling. Good, Sarah replied. It is time they learned that first contact is not about protocols and procedures. It is